In this video, we will talk about all the legends who left us recently. From icons of entertainment and politics to pioneers in their fields. These remarkable individuals shaped our world in unforgettable ways. Today, we pause to honor their memory, celebrate their achievements, and reflect on the impact they had on millions of lives. This is our heartfelt tribute to the legends we've lost. Gone, but never forgotten. Born on December 12, 1961, in Corpus Christi, Texas, Randolph Blake Farenthold entered the world in a state known for its independence, pride, and political energy. From an early age, Blake was exposed to public service and communication. His grandmother, Frances Farenthold, was a prominent Democratic politician, while Blake charted his own path rooted in conservative values and media. Before entering politics, Farenthold worked as a radio host and attorney. With a voice suited for the airwaves and a deep interest in constitutional matters, he built a reputation for being outspoken, analytical, and unapologetically conservative. These skills would soon pave the way for a remarkable political journey. The year was 2010, a time when the Tea Party movement was sweeping across America, giving rise to a new breed of Republican candidates who vowed to challenge the political establishment. In a surprising upset, Blake Farenthold rode that wave to victory, unseating longtime Democratic incumbent Solomon Ortiz in Texas's 27th congressional district. Few expected it. Fewer still could deny its significance. Farenthold began his tenure in the U.S. House of Representatives in January 2011. Over 4 consecutive terms, he became known for his advocacy on issues like technology policy, internet regulation, and government transparency. Serving on the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee, he championed efforts to hold federal agencies accountable. Though not always in the national spotlight, Farenthold gained respect within certain conservative circles for his consistency and passion for digital rights and individual freedoms. Yet his career was not without turbulence. In 2014, Farenthold became embroiled in a sexual harassment controversy involving a former staffer. The lawsuit was settled using taxpayer funds, a decision that would later haunt him, especially in the era of heightened scrutiny on workplace behavior and ethics in Washington. By 2018, pressure from both the public and political colleagues led Farenthold to resign before completing his 4th term. It was a dramatic fall for a man who had once ridden into Congress as part of a revolutionary movement. Following his resignation, Farenthold retreated from national politics, but remained active in local affairs. He briefly worked as a lobbyist for a Texas port authority, but largely stayed out of the headlines. While many of his former colleagues moved on to higher office or media platforms, Farenthold chose a quieter existence. On June 14, 2025, Blake Farenthold died of a heart attack at the age of 63. News of his passing stirred mixed reactions. To some, he was a fighter, a grassroots conservative who helped reshape the Republican Party during a critical time. To others, he was a cautionary tale of the consequences of poor judgment and a reminder of the complex nature of political life. In the end, Blake Farenthold's story reflects the volatility of modern American politics. He emerged in a wave of populist energy, left amid scandal, and died with a legacy still debated. He was not a typical politician, and perhaps that was both his strength and his undoing. As history continues to judge the early 21st century, Blake Farenthold's name will appear in its footnotes. As a man who arrived with a message, left with controversy, and reminded us that every public figure carries both ideals and flaws. Burrell was born on September 21, 1969, in the small town of Cazenovia, New York. With fiery red hair and a personality to match, she would grow up to become one of the most recognizable faces in the culinary world. A woman who brought energy, edge, and excellence to everything she cooked. From a young age, Anne was drawn to the kitchen. After earning an English and communications degree from Canisius College, she pursued her true passion: food. She enrolled in the Culinary Institute of America, then went on to study in Italy, where she trained in rustic Italian cuisine. Her time in Europe shaped her philosophy: bold flavors, fearless technique, and cooking with joy. Cut to images of early restaurant work, Italy, and Anne in Chef White's. Anne's professional career began behind the scenes in some of New York's most respected kitchens, including Lidia Bastianich's Felidia. But soon, her commanding presence brought her in front of the camera. In the mid-2000s, Food Network came calling, and so did the spotlight, and Burrell shot to fame as the spiky-haired, tough-love mentor on Worst Cooks in America, where her catchphrases and passion lit up screens across the country. Whether training hopeless home cooks or battling in Iron Chef America, she combined grit and warmth in a way few chefs could. Her no-nonsense attitude, flamboyant style, and signature pink highlights made her a fan favorite. Beyond television, Anne was a best-selling author and beloved teacher. Her books, Cook Like a Rock Star and Own Your Kitchen, encouraged home chefs to embrace cooking with confidence. She inspired countless viewers not just to follow recipes, but to take risks, have fun, and find themselves through food. Imagine clip. Food Network colleague. She didn't just teach people to cook, she taught them to believe they could. Anne was electric. Anne remained a constant on the culinary scene for over 2 decades. From appearances on The Best Thing I Ever Ate to her solo series Secrets of a Restaurant Chef, she built a media empire with authenticity and fire. Off-camera, she remained private but joyful, known for her deep love of Italian food, dogs, and bringing people together over meals. But then, in June 2025, the world was stunned. On the morning of June 18th, Anne Burrell was found unresponsive in her New York apartment. She was 55 years old. Authorities quickly announced that her death was under investigation. No immediate cause was given, and her fans were left shocked and searching for answers. Tributes poured in from around the world. Fellow chefs, former contestants, and fans who had found joy in her fiery energy and heartfelt mentorship. For a woman who had brought so much flavor to people's lives, her sudden departure left a bitter silence. Though the circumstances surrounding Anne Burrell's death remain unclear, her legacy is undeniable. She was a pioneer, a female chef who broke through a male-dominated industry with sheer talent and a whole lot of sass. She made food fun, fierce, and fearless. Anne Burrell taught us to cook like rock stars. But more importantly, she reminded us to live that way too. Boldly, passionately, with a full heart and an open flame. Anne Burrell, 1969 to 2025. The more you know, the more you can create. There's no end to imagination in the kitchen. Would come to know as Kim Woodburn was raised not in luxury or fame, but in hardship. Her early life was marked by adversity, including a deeply troubled family background and personal trauma that she would later courageously speak about. But even then, there was a fire in Kim, a fierce independence, a refusal to be broken, and a sense of pride that would one day become her trademark. Before she ever set foot in a TV studio, Kim lived a full and often difficult life. She worked various jobs, some glamorous, others grueling. But she eventually carved out a professional niche as a cleaner for high-end clients, building a quiet reputation for immaculate standards and no-nonsense work ethic. It was this skill and her fiery personality that would catapult her into the national spotlight. In 2003, everything changed when Kim joined forces with fellow presenter Aggie McKenzie, on Channel 4's How Clean Is Your House? The show was a revelation at a time when lifestyle TV was dominated by polish and pretense. Kim brought authenticity, humor, and ferocious standards. With her signature gloves, platinum hair, and commanding voice, Kim stormed through the filth of Britain's dirtiest homes, and in the process, cleaned her way into the hearts of millions. She didn't just disinfect kitchens, she disarmed egos. She was brash, brutally honest, and absolutely unforgettable. The public didn't just watch Kim clean. They watched her take no prisoners. Her fierce one-liners, side-eye glares, and take it or leave it attitude made her a cult figure, especially in the UK LGBTQ+ community, where she remains a beloved icon. After the success of How Clean Is Your House, Kim appeared on numerous other shows, including I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and most infamously, Celebrity Big Brother in 2017. Her stint on Big Brother was television gold, fiery, emotional, and unfiltered. She clashed with housemates, opened up about her past, and made headlines across the nation. Love her or hate her, one thing was clear: you couldn't ignore her. Yet behind the bold exterior was a woman of vulnerability and strength. Kim's public revelation about her abusive childhood and difficult upbringing added depth to her media persona. She wasn't just a loud voice, she was a survivor, a fighter, and someone who refused to be silenced by shame or society. So why is Kim Woodburn called a legend? Because she spoke her mind when others stayed silent. Because she turned cleaning, a mundane, overlooked task, into a form of empowerment. Because she brought unapologetic realness to an industry obsessed with appearances. Because through every insult, comeback, and unforgettable quote, she stood as a woman who'd lived through hell and came back swinging. Tribute Kim, you cleaned our homes. But more than that, you cleared the air. You reminded the world that dignity doesn't come from background, but from how you hold your head up. You were strong, sharp, and gloriously unscripted. You gave people permission to speak up, to demand better, and to own who they are. Thank you for the laughter, the truth, and the endless quotable moments. You didn't just tidy rooms, you tidied up television. And whether shouting, "You're a chicken-livered coward," or reminding us to disinfect the loo, you did it all your way. And that's why Kim Woodburn isn't just a personality, she's a phenomenon. Born on March 21, 1973, in Los Angeles, California, Ananda Lewis entered the world with a name that means bliss. And over the years, she would come to embody exactly that for a generation of viewers hungry for authenticity, depth, and representation. Raised primarily by her mother and grandmother, Ananda's early life was shaped by a deep sense of cultural pride and resilience. She spent part of her childhood in San Diego, where her passion for communication and performance began to bloom. Even at a young age, Ananda was known for being eloquent, sharp, and deeply thoughtful. These qualities would later set her apart in the fast-moving world of television. She studied at Howard University, a historically black college with a powerful legacy, where she majored in history and honed a powerful sense of self-awareness and advocacy. Her academic background and passion for community upliftment weren't just footnotes. They became the core of her media career. Ananda Lewis's rise to national fame began in the late 1990s, when she became a host on BET's Teen Summit, a groundbreaking show that gave voice to Black youth at a time when few mainstream platforms did. More than just a TV host, Ananda was a mentor, a sister figure, and a safe space for tough conversations. Whether she was tackling issues like peer pressure, education, or self-worth, her warmth and intelligence shined through. It wasn't long before MTV came calling. In 1997, Ananda joined MTV as a VJ during a golden era for the channel, hosting programs like Total Request Live and Hot Zone. But unlike many of her peers, Ananda wasn't content with pop fluff. She used her platform to elevate conversations, interviewing celebrities with soul, covering serious issues with grace, and never dumbing down her message. She quickly became a standout figure, someone who young women, especially young Black women, could look up to and see themselves in. In 2001, she launched The Ananda Lewis Show, her own daytime talk show. While it only aired for one season, it marked a major achievement, a young Black woman hosting a nationally syndicated show during a time when that was still a rarity. She used the platform to discuss healing, empowerment, and real-life struggles that other shows often ignored. But Ananda Lewis's legacy isn't just about TV. It's about what she stood for. Throughout her career, she used her voice to advocate for self-love, literacy, women's rights, and racial justice. She wasn't afraid to walk away from fame to pursue her deeper purpose. She studied carpentry, became a mother, and lived with integrity, even as the spotlight dimmed. In 2020, Ananda bravely revealed she had been battling breast cancer for 2 years, diagnosed after delaying a mammogram. Instead of retreating into privacy, she chose to educate, empower, and warn others, especially women of color, to take their health seriously. Her vulnerability became another form of service, reminding the world that strength comes in many forms. So why is Ananda Lewis called a legend? Because she used her voice with purpose. Because she carved out a space for honest conversations in a world addicted to the superficial. Because she dared to be wise, Black, beautiful, and outspoken in front of millions. Because she never lost her soul, even when she could have sold it. Tribute Ananda. You weren't just on our screens. You were in our hearts. You taught us to be fearless, to speak truth, and to never apologize for our brilliance. You uplifted young minds when they were searching for identity. And even in your quiet seasons, your presence was a light. Thank you for being a voice of clarity, courage, and compassion. You didn't just host shows, you hosted change. In the heart of Southern California, where the waves kiss the shore and the sun rarely sleeps, Brian Douglas Wilson was born on June 20th, 1942, in Inglewood, California. The world didn't know it yet, but that quiet blue-eyed boy would one day change the face of popular music forever. Raised in Hawthorne with his two younger brothers, Dennis and Carl, Brian was surrounded by harmony, both musically and emotionally. From an early age, he displayed an extraordinary ear for music, reportedly picking out complex harmonies on the piano by the age of 5. But behind the peaceful suburb and the sound of surfboards, Brian Wilson was absorbing something far deeper. Music became his language, his obsession, and eventually his salvation. By the early 1960s, Brian, along with his brothers and cousin Mike Love, formed the Beach Boys. At first, they were California's sunny sons, clean-cut, harmony-rich, and the very sound of the American dream. But behind the catchy songs about cars and surfboards, Brian was already pulling away from the formula. He wasn't just a pop songwriter, he was an artist, hearing symphonies in his head while others heard singles. Brian's prime years, from 1964 to 1967, are still considered one of the most astonishing creative runs in music history. During this time, he wrote and produced hit after hit, and then, in 1966, he released what many critics and artists still call the greatest album of all time, Pet Sounds. Pet Sounds wasn't just an album, it was a revolution. Layered harmonies, orchestral arrangements, unconventional instruments like bicycle bells and theremins. It was unlike anything the world had heard before. Songs like God Only Knows, Wouldn't It Be Nice, and Carolyn No weren't just melodies. They were soul-deep explorations of vulnerability, longing, and beauty. And it all came from Brian's tortured genius, his relentless desire to push sound to its emotional limits. Then came Good Vibrations, a standalone single that redefined what a pop song could be. Clocking in at over 3 minutes with no fixed structure and dozens of instrumental layers. It was a sonic miracle. Even the Beatles were in awe. But Brian's brilliance came at a cost. Struggling with mental illness, drug use, and the pressures of expectation, he withdrew from the spotlight by the late 60s. For years, he battled depression and schizophrenia, spending long periods in isolation. Many believed the music had stopped forever. But legends don't fade. They rise again. In the 1990s and 2000s, Brian Wilson returned, releasing solo work and finally completing his long-lost masterpiece, Smile, in 2004. A project that had haunted him since the 60s. The album was a triumph and a symbol of personal redemption. He also received the Kennedy Center honors, was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and received a Grammy Award, finally receiving the recognition that had long eluded him. So why is Brian Wilson called a legend? Because he reinvented what pop music could be. Because he turned 3-minute songs into emotional epics. Because he created harmony in a time of chaos, both in the world and in his own mind. Because despite being broken, he never gave up on beauty. Tribute. Brian, your melodies became memories. Your harmonies were the heartbeat of a generation. You gave voice to the joy and pain that lives within us all. You showed the world that genius doesn't always look like perfection. Sometimes it looks like struggle, like honesty, like you. You didn't just write music, you changed music. And for that, the world will always sing your song. On June 6, 1932, in San Antonio, Texas, a future legend was born. David Randolph Scott, known to the world simply as Dave Scott. His journey wouldn't be one of loud headlines or dramatic gestures. Instead, his legacy was built on discipline, courage, and a relentless pursuit of precision. Qualities that would one day help carry humanity beyond the skies. Dave grew up in military environments, the son of an Army officer, and spent much of his youth moving from base to base. This lifestyle shaped his resilience and drive. He eventually graduated from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1954, finishing 5th in a class of over 600, a testament to his brilliance and focus. Later, he earned 2 master's degrees from MIT in aeronautics and astronautics, becoming one of the most technically trained astronauts of his generation. But it wasn't just academic excellence that defined Dave Scott. It was his ability to lead under pressure, and nowhere would that matter more than in the vacuum of space. In 1966, Dave Scott made his first journey into orbit aboard Gemini 8, alongside Neil Armstrong. The mission became NASA's first real in-space emergency, when a stuck thruster sent the spacecraft spinning uncontrollably. It was Scott's calm under pressure, along with Armstrong's quick decisions, that saved the mission and their lives. That moment revealed Dave Scott not just as a skilled astronaut, but as someone who could think clearly in the chaos of the unknown. But his most iconic role came in 1971 as commander of Apollo 15, the 9th crewed mission in the Apollo program, and the first to focus on real science on the moon. On July 30th, 1971, Dave Scott landed on the moon with fellow astronaut James Irwin. Unlike previous missions, Apollo 15 was equipped with the Lunar Roving Vehicle, essentially the first car on the moon. Dave Scott became the first man to drive on the lunar surface, covering miles of untouched terrain in what was essentially an alien world. He and Irwin spent nearly 19 hours outside the spacecraft, collecting rock samples, studying lunar geology, and performing experiments. But perhaps his most famous moment came when he conducted a live demonstration of Galileo's theory that objects fall at the same rate in a vacuum. Standing on the moon, Scott dropped a feather and a hammer and watched as they hit the lunar surface simultaneously. In that one elegant act, he showed the world the poetry of science and the beauty of truth in motion. After retiring from spaceflight, Dave Scott continued to serve NASA and later consulted for space-related films and documentaries, always committed to education and excellence. He didn't seek the spotlight, but he earned it. So why is Dave Scott called a legend? Because he proved that discipline and intelligence could take us to the moon. Because he was a pioneer of science, not just exploration. Because he carried the calm and courage of a leader even when the stakes were as high as the stars. Because he reminded the world that history is written not just in giant leaps, but in careful steps taken with integrity. Tribute, Dave, you were more than a man who walked on the moon. You were a symbol of what humanity can achieve when we lead with curiosity, focus, and grace. You showed us that heroes don't always need capes. Sometimes they wear flight suits and carry geology tools. You didn't just explore space. You helped us understand it. Thank you for proving that the greatest missions are not fueled by glory, but by purpose. You reached for the moon and brought back knowledge, courage, and a legacy that will never fade. You hosted change. In the industrial heartlands of Essex, England, in the year 1966, a young man named Douglas John McCarthy was born. At first glance, he seemed like any other teenager of the post-punk era, restless, rebellious, and searching for meaning in the static. But behind his intense gaze and sharpened voice was a vision that would electrify the underground and give a new shape to aggression in music. McCarthy's journey began in Chelmsford, where he would later meet Bon Harris, a kindred spirit equally obsessed with rhythm, noise, and raw emotion. Together, they formed Nitzer Ebb in the early 1980s, a band that didn't just play music, but unleashed a movement. Inspired by punk energy and the emerging electronic soundscapes of Kraftwerk and DAF, Nitzer Ebb fused militaristic rhythms, shouted vocals, and dark electronics into something utterly visceral. Their 1987 debut album, That Total Age, hit like a bomb. Tracks like Join in the Chant and Let Your Body Learn weren't just songs. They were anthems for the disillusioned. On stages across Europe and America, McCarthy didn't sing. He commanded. With a shaved head, a snarl in his voice, and a presence that was equal parts preacher and revolutionary, he became the icon of a new kind of industrial energy. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, Nitzer Ebb rose as one of the defining voices of EBM, electronic body music. Albums like Belief and Showtime showcased a maturing sound, more complex but still ferocious. Douglas McCarthy's vocals were the soul of the machine, angry, desperate, urgent. His lyrics cut through the coldness of synths with human anguish and intensity. Nitzer Ebb toured with giants like Depeche Mode, earning them global recognition and introducing their brutal beauty to wider audiences. McCarthy's confrontational style, often stripped to the barest essentials, shirtless, sweat-drenched, screaming truth into a strobe-lit void, became legendary. So why is Douglas McCarthy a legend? Because he gave industrial music a human heart and a warrior's scream. Because he stood at the intersection of punk and machine and made chaos poetic. Because he inspired countless artists, from Nine Inch Nails to modern techno DJs, to embrace the beauty of brutal sound. Because he never conformed, he never softened, he never apologized. Douglas McCarthy's legacy isn't built on radio hits or chart positions. It's built on sweat-soaked stages, underground loyalty, and the defiant pulse of resistance. Tribute, Douglas. Your voice tore through silence. You made the mechanical feel emotional. You gave the voiceless a chant, a battle cry, a sound to believe in. You weren't just part of the underground. you were its beating heart. You reminded the world that music doesn't always comfort. Sometimes it confronts, challenges, and changes us. Thank you for every scream, every rhythm, every truth shouted in the dark. You didn't just make noise, you made revolution. The sunlit city of Marietta, Georgia, on December 20th, 1966, Christopher Mark Robinson was born into a world that would soon come to recognize the raw force of Southern rock revival. From a young age, music pulsed through his veins. His father, Stanley Robinson, a part-time musician, introduced Chris and his younger brother Rich to the blues, country, and classic rock records that filled their home. It was this early exposure that lit a fire in Chris's soul, a fire that would one day roar across stages around the world. The world first felt the shockwave of Chris Robinson's voice in 1989, when he and Rich formed the Black Crowes, a band that would come to symbolize the gritty, authentic edge of American rock and roll in the 90s. Their debut album, Shake Your Moneymaker, released in 1990, was a lightning bolt that brought back the spirit of the Rolling Stones and the raw emotion of Otis Redding, all wrapped in Chris's soulful vocals and unpredictable stage energy. From hits like Hard to Handle, She Talks to Angels, and Remedy, to legendary live performances soaked in sweat, soul, and Southern attitude, Chris Robinson was more than a frontman. He was a force of nature. His presence was magnetic, his style unapologetic, and his voice unforgettable. While grunge and pop dominated the charts, the Black Crowes held their ground like rock and roll outlaws, keeping the genre alive for a new generation. The prime of Chris Robinson's career wasn't just defined by record sales or chart positions. It was the era when his band became known as one of the greatest live rock acts of the decade. From their epic tours with acts like Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin to marathon jam sessions that felt more like spiritual awakenings than concerts, Chris Robinson commanded attention and respect. But like all great artists, Chris wasn't content to stay in one place. After internal tensions led the Black Crowes to disband temporarily in the early 2000s, Chris reinvented himself with the Chris Robinson Brotherhood, diving deeper into psychedelic rock and cosmic Americana. His evolution as a songwriter and performer reflected his journey: rebellious, spiritual, fearless. He remained committed to the music, not fame, not image, but the raw experience of creation and connection. So why is Chris Robinson called a legend? Because he never compromised. Because he brought rock and roll back when it was in danger of fading. Because he turned every stage into a revival tent and every song into a sermon. Because in a world of polished sounds and packaged artists, Chris Robinson remained gloriously untamed. He's not just the voice of a band. He's the sound of defiance, passion, and musical freedom. Even today, as the Black Crowes reunite and continue to tour, his legacy is alive and evolving. Chris Robinson is not just a chapter in rock history, he's a living testament to its survival. Tribute Chris, your voice has been the soundtrack of rebellion, heartbreak, joy, and raw truth for millions.
Though their voices may be quiet now, their impact still echoes, in songs and stories and memories that refuse to fade. These legends may have left this world, but they've left us richer. With inspiration, with lessons, with love, may we carry their legacy forward, not just by remembering who they were, but by living with the same passion and purpose they gave to the world. Rest in power. You are gone, but never forgotten.